To the world, Dee Dee and Gypsy Rose Blanchard were a perfect mother-daughter pair. One devoted and the other tragically ill. Leukemia, muscular dystrophy, seizures, you name it, Gypsy had it. Or so we thought. But behind those smiling photos was a dark, dark secret. Years of medical abuse, lies, and control. And then, in 2015, the truth came crashing down when Dee Dee Blanchard was found murdered. Was Gypsy behind it? Was this cold-blooded murder or a desperate act for freedom? Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of A Brush with Death. I am your host, Miss Casey Hanalei, and in this series, I sit down, I tell you a true crime story, and I paint you a pretty picture at the same time. Now, if you love art and you love true crime, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That way you will never miss one of my stories. Now, before we start, let me introduce you to our special guest today, which is Harley Quinn. I did a few years ago. This is a digital piece I did with Procreate. And just like this piece, I decided to do something a little different for the painting today. And I'm going to be doing something digital today. So I hope you guys like that, right? So what case are we talking about today? Miss Gypsy Rose Blanchard. So this case is crazy, and I hope that you guys, are buckled up and your butts are clean because who knows what's going to happen. Let's get into it. July 27th, 1991 is when Gypsy Rose Blanchard was born in Golden Meadow, Louisiana. So, hey guys, how's it going down there? To Claudine, or Dee Dee Blanchard, and Rod Blanchard. The two were married, however, they did separate shortly before Gypsy Rose's birth, and Rod was trying to remain in Gypsy's life. He paid child support and attempted visiting her, but we'll see that as Gypsy gets older, the fewer and fewer Rod saw Gypsy, and I think he has definitely said that he regrets not trying harder or not being as present in her life because of what eventually happens, right? So in 1994, 1995, so Gypsy is 3 or 4 years old. This is when the first signs of illness, quote unquote illness, come about. Dee Dee begins claiming that Gypsy suffers from sleep apnea, and then progressively adds leukemia, muscular dystrophy, seizures, vision and hearing impairments, and also intellectual disabilities. So if you've ever seen pictures of Gypsy when she was especially really little, she's got these big old glasses, and she looks very sickly. So I can see how somebody would be maybe fooled by, Dee Dee's song and dance, right? But, man, if this was true, this is so much on a tiny little body, right? And being a parent, why would you push that on your child if you didn't have to? But anyways, I digress. So in the late 90s, early 2000s, this is when Gypsy undergoes a lot of unnecessary treatments. We'll find they are necessary later. So Gypsy is confined to a wheelchair. Later, we find out that she can freaking walk. She is fed via a feeding tube. She is also prescribed anti-seizure medications and undergoes multiple surgeries, including eye procedures and salivary gland removal. Just the monstrosity that was Dee Dee Blanchard. I can't. We'll get there. Don't worry. I'm just kind of trying to set it up here. So in 2005, this is when, they're in Louisiana. So this is when Hurricane Katrina hits the East Coast and does unfathomable amount of damage. And this kind of accelerates Dee Dee's deception, we'll see. So she later claims that Hurricane Katrina, all of Gypsy's medical records were lost. So this made it a lot easier for her to kind of give them the history of Gypsy's medical, diagnoses and stuff. So people and doctors included were just kind of taking Dee Dee's word for it at this point because, her medical records were lost in Katrina. Like, poor us. Oh, no, So people were, like, not only believing her, but also, like, really wanting to help. And that just kind of, like, I think blinded a lot of people. So after Hurricane Katrina, this is when Dee Dee and Gypsy relocate to Missouri for a fresh start. And this is when Gypsy and Dee Dee are kind of like local celebrities, right? So they, start gaining a lot of attention. Gypsy becomes like the public face of, illness inspiration, and Dee Dee fabricates stories about Gypsy's illnesses in order to receive free housing from Habitat Humanity. And this is like the first time I saw like any like big news coverage of Gypsy. So when they moved into this house, there was a lot of news coverage. It was like, like puff piece, like good feeling, what is that? Human relation, inspirational. I don't know. It was one of those pieces. And so that gained a lot of attention locally. They also gained a lot of sympathy and donations and trips, including trips to Disney World. So Dee Dee is really just milking this for all she can. I also want to note that I've watched a lot of like interviews with Gypsy, after the fact, obviously. And she was saying how when she was little, she knew that she could walk, right? But she was so afraid of her mother that she stayed in the wheelchair and she pretended not to walk. But when they were home and within the house, she would walk around all the time and talk normally. And so we'll see later that Gypsy is definitely like a product of her environment, I should say. And the amount of physical child abuse is staggering, and also the mental child abuse is out of this world, and not in a good way, obviously. It really does affect Gypsy in a very negative way. I think her, neuro pathways, right, are definitely like not set in stone, but they're very ingrained with manipulation and deception. So anyways, I just wanted to mention that it's, from the very beginning, Dee Dee was manipulating her daughter into, into her own agenda, right? Into perceiving, other people perceiving them as being needy when there was nothing wrong with Gypsy. Anyways, so in 2008, there's a report later that Gypsy attempts to escape with a man that she met at a sci-fi convention. But unfortunately, she is caught by Dee Dee. She destroys Gypsy's computer and restrains her physically in the home so that she does not escape. Again, like the trauma and the mental and physical abuse here is just unbelievable. And the fact that Gypsy is, I'll say my opinion of Gypsy later, but like the fact that Gypsy is like a seemingly functioning person now is just blows my mind, right? So after Dee Dee finds out that she tried to escape, she destroys her computer. However, Gypsy starts to begin a secret online activity again soon afterward. And this is when she meets Mr. Nicholas Godejohn. So this is around 2010, 2011. Gypsy meets Nicholas Godejohn on a Christian dating site. So I think it was like Christian Mingle or something. Yeah. Wow. Godejohn has autism and mental health issues, and they quickly form a sexual relationship. And they mostly communicate through like role-playing personas. So Gypsy's alter ego was named Ruby, and Godejohn's was Victor, and this was his like evil side, right? So in March 2015, so their relationship goes on for years. I mean, they were dating, quote unquote, online dating for what, 3-4 years at this point. So March 2015 in Springfield, Missouri, Dee Dee and Gypsy plan to go to a movie, to the not premiere, but like the live action Cinderella movie, which is, I think, actually really good. I really like that one. The one that just came out, Snow White, not so much, right? But anyways, that one is actually really good. So they planned on going to see the new Cinderella movie, and Gypsy and Nicholas decided that that's where they were going to meet for the first time. So, so Gypsy started talking to Nicholas about her, like, feeling trapped and feel like she couldn't escape. And so it was already, like, pretty intense between her and Dee Dee at this point, and Dee Dee was just very zoomed in on Gypsy. So her and Nick conspire together to, meet up at this movie theater. So Nicholas traveled by bus from Wisconsin, where he's from, to Missouri, which is about a 9-hour ride just to meet Gypsy. And this is all without Dee Dee knowing. So at the movie theater, Gypsy is dressed up as Cinderella in this like cute little dress, and she is playing into a fantasy where Nicholas would rescue her from her mother, basically. So when they're at the movie theater, Nicholas sat near them in the theater. Eventually, Gypsy struck up a random conversation with Nicholas and introduced herself in front of Dee Dee. Now, I can only imagine what Dee Dee was thinking at the time, like, who the F is this, Reports later said that the introduction was very awkward, as I can only imagine, and was rushed, as Dee Dee was suspicious and very protective at the time. So the movie starts, right, and they're watching the movie, and during the movie, somehow Gypsy, and Nicholas is sitting near, like, right next to them, right? So somehow during the movie, Gypsy convinces her mom that she needs to use the restroom. So she gets up and Nicholas follows her, and they end up having sex in the bathroom during the movie at the theater. Which, like, first of all, how did they pull that off? Like, I want to know how all that went down. I don't want to know the details, right? But I want to know, like, how they actually pulled that off. And then, like, how good can that be? Like, probably wasn't fat, probably wasn't too long. Oh, poor Nicholas. Anyways, so they end up having sex in the bathroom, and Dee Dee reportedly had no idea this was happening, which, like, if she was so, like, suspicious and protective, like, why didn't she notice that Nicholas went too? Like, anyways. So, after they met at the movie, Dee Dee was furious at Gypsy for talking to a stranger and really tightened her control at this point. So this is where it really escalates, and I don't think Dee Dee had any idea, like, what her daughter was capable of and what she was really feeding here. So, yeah. So, after the movie in March, in June 2015, this is when Gypsy decides that she wants to kill her mother. So, Gypsy reveals to Nicholas that she is ready to kill Dee Dee and for him to help her. So they start planning Dee Dee's murder, and early June, this is when they're planning it out. And then June 9th, this is when Nicholas shows up in Springfield, Missouri. He, again, I think he rode a bus. I'm not sure. I should have looked that up. But anyways, he buys the murder weapon and the gloves online, which I'm like, paper trail, like, what are you doing? He arrives at their house. He messages Gypsy that he's there, and I think she left the door open for him, and he comes in and puts on the gloves, and she goes to hide in the bathroom, and she covers her ears, and that is when Godejohn stabs Dee Dee 17 times in her bed. Later, Gypsy asked Nicholas not to sexually assault her mother's body after he was done, so he agreed, but said that, well, you need to have sex with me then instead. Which I don't know if that's true. But if it is, that's terrible. Like, is that in exchange for murdering your mother? I don't know. So after Godejohn murders Dee Dee, he goes to Gypsy. They have sexual intercourse. They take some money that they find lying around, and they escape by bus to Wisconsin, where Godejohn is from. Now, the murder scene is so bloody and messy, but Dee Dee isn't found right away. So, June 14th, so this is 5 days later, social media is utilized by Godejohn. So Gypsy is like getting worried that she hasn't heard anything about her mother's body being found, and maybe she feels a little guilty, or maybe, I don't know, maybe like the anxiety of having her mother's body found just like got to her and she just wanted it found already. So what they do is they get on Dee Dee's Facebook account, and Godejohn, Nicholas, I should say, types a status saying, quote, "That bitch is dead," unquote. So friends and family are automatically concerned. Like, they type, like, who are you talking about? Like, is this a joke? Like, what is going on? So they report this to the police, and the police end up finding Dee Dee's body and Gypsy missing from the home. They also see that Gypsy's wheelchair and her medication is missing, or are still there. So they're thinking at first somebody came in, murdered Dee Dee, and kidnapped Gypsy, and they need to find her fast because she cannot go very long without her medication. And so it's this very like high stress situation of them trying to find Gypsy. Soon authorities trace the IP address from the status update to Mr. Nicholas Godejohn's house in Wisconsin. So just the way that they like went about this is just not, it's very teenage, and Gypsy, Dee Dee says that Gypsy is 19 years old. She's actually 23 years old. Now, there's an argument to be made that your frontal lobe does not fully develop until you are 25 years old. So you really shouldn't make any large life decisions, including killing your mother, until you are at least 25 years old. I'm joking, guys. I'm joking. But with that being said, like, Gypsy is an adult, and all of this was not planned very well. Like, what did she expect was going to happen? That she and Nicholas were going to run off together and that was going to be it? Like, there was no real, like, plan. And two, so they didn't take the murder weapon with them. They actually mailed it to themselves, which is, like, confusing as well. Like, I don't really understand, like, why they did that. It's because they didn't want it found on their person. But again, like, why ship it to yourself? Like, you're just, somebody's gonna find it, you know? I don't know. So, June 15th, the police are still searching for Gypsy, and they follow that IP address to Nicholas Godejohn's house, and there they find Gypsy. And at this point, they are so worried for Gypsy and wondering what condition she's going to be in. Like, she has gone a few days without her medication. Like, she's going to be in rough shape. And then they get there, and the media is there, the community is there when they take Gypsy out, and Gypsy can walk. And not only can she walk, she can, like, speak normally, which she's usually, like, has, you know, trouble. Her mother said that she had learning disabilities, so everyone thought that she was in rough shape, and she could walk and talk and be normal, quote unquote normal, right? So people are stunned. So the next day, June 16th, this is when Gypsy confesses, but she doesn't confess to the murder necessarily. She confesses to the years and years of physical and mental and child abuse. You know, Dee Dee made her pretend to be disabled, forced medical procedures, withheld her true age. Like I said, she said that Gypsy was 19. She was really 23 years old. And there was even stories that Rod, her father, had mentioned later that, you know, well, Gypsy, you know, she has the mind of a 7-year-old. And even though she's turning 18, you need to tell her that she's turning 15 because she's not going to be able to handle it. Like, that's what her mother would do. And Rod just went along with it. He thought that that was the case. Now, again, I don't think he saw Gypsy very often. And Dee Dee was very protective and withholding of Gypsy. So I don't want to blame him at all. There was a lot of failures in this chain. But, you know, hindsight is 20/20, right? So you may be wondering, just like I think everyone else was, is how can something like this happen? Dee Dee had medical procedures performed on Gypsy. How did she totally deceive everyone, including the doctors? Well, there's a few reasons, and just kind of all came together in one big, horrible, perfect storm to make it possible for Dee Dee to navigate this. And one of those things was medical manipulation and doctor hopping, or aka doctor shopping. So one thing that Dee Dee did was she would go to one doctor and try to get a certain diagnosis or something done with Gypsy. And if that doctor said no, she would just go to the next and go to the next and go to the next until she got the answer that she wanted. Now, Dee Dee was really familiar with medical speak, she worked as a nurse's aide, also called a nursing assistant, in her younger years in Louisiana. And this role doesn't require advanced medical education, but it gave her enough exposure to like medical terminology and procedures and hospital culture, and also how to manipulate symptoms. So she was able to go to doctors and show, like, look, Gypsy is drooling excessively. We need to have this surgery done to remove her salivary glands. And that is exactly one of the examples that she used. She was able to get Gypsy to drool a lot and ended up removing her salivary glands. And this messes all of this messes Gypsy up, but Gypsy has scars from this. And now she has a lot of like issues with her teeth. And she has dentures now. I don't think she has any of her own teeth left because of all the medications that she has taken. It's just so sad. It's widely believed that she used all of her medical knowledge to convincingly fabricate Gypsy's illnesses and manipulate the doctors and also the charities as well. Her medical familiarity made her more believable, and she weaponized that credibility to deepen her deception and abuse. Dee Dee was very well versed in medical terminology and symptoms, and she'd memorize symptoms from medical textbooks and Google, visit multiple specialists from the same conditions, use false diagnosis from one doctor to back up new claims at another clinic. Like, she was a master manipulator, and she knew how to work the system. She would claim medical records were lost in Hurricane Katrina, remember? And so that made it even more difficult to verify the information that she was giving. Another example of this is she convinced doctors that Gypsy had muscular dystrophy simply because of her low muscle tone. And when one doctor doubted it, she just moved on to the next one and eventually got a diagnosis for Gypsy saying that she had muscular dystrophy. Is this like lazy doctors, or is it what? Maybe it's people just not understanding that like this can actually happen. Like, anyways, Dee Dee also fabricated and forged medical documents as well. She would alter records and forge medical records. She lied about Gypsy's age, shaving off years to keep her in pediatric care longer. She created a paper trail that made it appear as though Gypsy had been sick since infancy. One doctor later discovered that Gypsy's actual birth date had been changed several times in medical records as well. So this is just to keep up that like childlike appearance. And if you've seen pictures of Gypsy, especially when she was under her mother's care, she does look very weak and malnourished and childlike. Even her voice is very childlike. So she was easily able to convince everyone that Gypsy was this very sickly child. Dee Dee also isolated Gypsy, and which further hid, Gypsy's wellness. Gypsy was, apart from the abuse, Gypsy was a very healthy young woman. She kept Gypsy away from schools, from friends, from extended family, even her father, Rod Blanchard. Gypsy was homeschooled and taught never to question authority, and Dee Dee also monitored all her conversations, her mail, her internet use. This eliminated witnesses who could notice inconsistencies of signs of wellness. So, like I said before, like Gypsy remembers being young and wanting to go play with other kids, and she had to stay in her wheelchair because she was too terrified of her mother to get up from that wheelchair. She also used sympathy and pity to keep this horror show going. Dee Dee created a very heartbreaking narrative around Gypsy. She once said, "I'm a single mother raising a terminally ill daughter with cancer, epilepsy, and brain damage." We've covered like serial killers and, just some horrible, nasty people. And I think this kind of takes the cake. I think if you're willing to kill your child's spirit, you are the ultimate evil. And, I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but like in this case, the victim, I'm not necessarily convinced that it was Dee Dee. I'm probably going to get like some bad comments from that, but I really think that she was evil walking. Like, she was so exploitive, especially with her child, and she manipulated charities like Ronald McDonald House, Make-A-Wish, and Habitat for Humanity. Local news outlets ran inspiring stories without verifying facts about Dee Dee and Gypsy. And also a lot of community generosity came in for them. People gave them housing, gifts, free flights, and even a car because of what Dee Dee did. And then when people would question Dee Dee about her story, she'd claim they were just cruel or jealous. And the last thing I want to mention is the systematic medical failures here. Several doctors, I'm sure, saw red flags, including the lack of medical evidence for all her conditions, normal test results contradicting her claims, but most didn't push back because fear lawsuits or being wrong. A lot went the benefit of the doubt, bias toward a sympathetic mother and her terminally ill child. No centralized system to flag frequent hospital visits across state lines. And I think they're working on this right now is like, let's make sure this doesn't happen again, right? Is putting up guardrails so that, medical staff is alerted when somebody tries to do something like this. And not only maybe to somebody else, but maybe with themselves as well. One notable exception, though, that I did want to mention is Dr. Bernardo Flasterstein. He was a neurologist, and he suspected I can never say it. Munchausen by proxy. See, I got it. And reported Dee Dee to the authorities. But Child Protective Services never followed up on this, and no formal investigation was launched. And I think he was questioned later on, like, what he actually thought. And I think he, like, tried to push it. And then once, Child Protective Services didn't do anything about it, he just kind of dropped it. And I was watching one of the documentaries about this case, too. And they said that she was on a lot of seizure medication as well. And usually with those really heavy medications, if you do not have, like, epilepsy or whatever, if you don't have actual epilepsy and you take the medication replicates the symptoms of that actual illness. So Gypsy wasn't having seizures before she was taking the medication, but when she started taking the medication, she started to have seizures. So in a way, Dee Dee was making her lies truth, in my honest opinion. Gypsy came out healthy, and by giving her these surgeries and giving her these medications and mentally and emotionally abusing her, she created probably learning disabilities. She created brain damage. She created all of the things that she said Gypsy was suffering from, apart from like her being able to walk and talk and stuff. But she was making it truth. And as a mother, like, was she even self-aware of what she was doing? Was she so sick that she was believing her own lies. It really makes me think about that. What do you guys think? Do you think that Dee Dee understood what she was doing? Or did you think that in her own mind she was doing the right thing? I really don't know. Gypsy herself said, "I didn't even know what being normal was supposed to feel like." And I think that made her just more easily manipulated, right? She had a history of this. Also, Dee Dee, she had a history of manipulation. Lori Petrie, which is Dee Dee's stepmother, and other relatives have openly accused Dee Dee of possibly killing her own mother, Emma Louise Gisclair. Gisclair? Yeah. Years earlier. Emma died under mysterious circumstances while Dee Dee was supposedly her full-time caretaker. After Emma's death, family members claim that Dee Dee may have been withholding food, possibly poisoning her. Nothing has ever formally been investigated or confirmed, but her family believes it to be truth, basically. They suspected foul play from the start and later used that suspicion to explain Dee Dee's pattern of control and toxicity. If that was true, then why did you allow Gypsy to stay with her? So many failures. The family, medical, friends, neighbors, the news. Everyone failed here. Everyone failed. Anyways, Dee Dee was also accused of stealing from family members and writing bad checks and intentionally making her stepmother sick by putting a Roundup the weed killer, in her food, allegedly. So, if she had a history of this, why didn't anyone say anything or do anything? Now, say what you will about Gypsy, but I truly believe that, was there any other way out? I don't know. She didn't feel like there was. Now, is murder the right thing to do ever? No. Murder is never the right choice, but what happens when that's your only option? Gypsy felt like that was her only option. I don't know, this one, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, but Gypsy is a whole other type of monster, I think. But again, she is the product of her circumstances, I believe. She was trained and grew up to manipulate and deceive. And, I do feel bad for her. I do, everyone has free will, right? But man, Gypsy had a rough go. So in 2015, Gypsy is evaluated. She does a lot of psychiatric evaluations, make sure that she's doing okay. Again, the resilience, I'm very, very shocked. Even with Gypsy's kind of manipulative ways now, she's surprisingly well adjusted, which, wow. Experts determine she was a victim of, how do I say it wrong? Munchausen's by Proxy. I'm trying, guys. Public opinion largely sympathized with Gypsy at the time. In July 2015, Gypsy takes a plea deal and she pleads guilty to second-degree murder, and she is sentenced to 10 years in prison. And then Nicholas Godejohn, he is tried separately, and the defense claims he has mental illness and was manipulated into murdering Dee Dee. The prosecution insists he acted with premeditation, which he did. In November of 2018, Nicholas Godejohn is found guilty of first-degree murder, and he is sentenced in February the next year, in 2019, to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, this was another failure, I think. Gypsy was manipulated and abused, but she ended up being perfectly normal psychologically. Nicholas Godejohn, on the other hand, has autism and has learning disabilities, and he was taken advantage of, and he was manipulated into doing this. He thought he was saving Gypsy from her evil mother, right? And it's not fair, and this is my opinion, but it's not fair that she gets out and he has to spend the rest of his life in prison. Where is the reform here? I think Nicholas Godejohn at least could be in some kind of program where maybe he's not completely left alone, right? But at least maybe he can re-enter society and be, rehabilitated. I think there's at least a chance, right, that, they released a lot of the conversations that him and Gypsy had online and stuff, and a lot of people accuse him of being like this monster, right? But I honestly think he was just severely misled, and I don't think his home life was full of love either. He was clinging on to Gypsy as hard as he could, and I think it's a missed opportunity for rehabilitation. That's just my opinion. So as of December 2023, Gypsy Rose is released from prison after serving 85% of her sentence. This gains massive attention, public attention, and she becomes a quick symbol for victims of abuse and survivor advocacy. 2024, 2024, and 2025, Gypsy becomes active on social media. She gives interviews. She's also working on a memoir and participates in documentaries and shows, including Gypsy Rose Life After Lockup. Have you guys watched this? Is it on Lifetime or on TLC? I can't remember. I think it's on Lifetime. Anyways, this is where I get my opinion of Gypsy now. I think that Gypsy is, if you watch the show, it is reality TV, so take it with a grain of salt. But if you watch the show, Gypsy is super manipulative. She got married in prison to this guy named Ryan. And, when she gets released, Ryan goes to pick her up, right? And already, the film crew is like following around. So, I think part of it is true, right? But, some of it's played up for the drama, right? But from the start, she's gaslighting him, and she's talking to her ex-boyfriend all while she's married to Ryan. And he's like, who are you talking to? Blah, 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 and she's like, oh, I'm just talking to my sister, blah, blah, blah. But the whole time she's actually talking to this other guy. I think his name is Ken. Anyways, and so she's like, oh, everything's fine, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden she's like, Ryan's this horrible guy. And she gets with her family. She's like, oh, he does this. And he always gets angry. And he always does this. And it's all orchestrated by Gypsy. Or that's how they're playing it off on the show. And then she ends up getting with Ken. And that's who she has her baby with, by the way. So she was pregnant and she has a kid now with this new guy, Ken, and I don't know if she tries to manipulate him either, but you can see a lot of like classic manipulation techniques in the show, and I am just like flabbergasted when I'm watching it, right? Like, and I wonder if other people feel the same way that I do. You know, she could have like turned it around. She, instead of like trying to be this like reality TV star, right? She could have started a charity or something, you know, instead of making it about her, you know, making it about being an advocate for child abuse or, you know, women's rights or something like that, right? But she takes the opportunity to like become this like TikTok, Instagram reality TV star instead. And it's just, again, another like missed opportunity. Like, God. With all of that being said, I still feel bad for Gypsy, and I think she's harmless. I don't think that she's, you know, gonna go out and murder anyone else. But, you know, I really hope that maybe eventually she turns it around and, you know, maybe becomes an advocate for one of those groups that I mentioned. And, you know, she could be a real strong beam of light for those charities. So anyways, one of the last things I wanted to mention was, you know, Dee Dee, again, like I said before, like, I don't think Dee Dee is the victim in this case, even though she was murdered, which is like horrible to say. But one thing that I find very apparent and clear, the family admits to flushing Dee Dee's ashes down the toilet. They literally got Dee Dee's ashes and flushed it down the toilet because they felt like that was the right thing to do. What kind of person do you have to be to get murdered and your family still feels like they have to get rid of your memory by flushing you down the toilet? Wow. But again, like, murder is never the answer. Dee Dee did a lot of horrible things in her life, but did she deserve to die like that? No, she didn't. So I think we can all probably agree on that. I hope. So the few takeaways that I want to get from this wow case is, one of them is the hidden dangers of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, which, you know, this case brought Munchausen by proxy into the public awareness like never before. I had never heard of it before this case. Have you? Dee Dee convinced dozens of doctors, organizations, and individuals that Gypsy was sick when she wasn't. Even extreme long-term medical abuse can go unnoticed without proper psychiatric evaluations and systematic checks. Another takeaway is that medical professionals must question red flags. Over 20 years of unnecessary surgeries, medications, and diagnosis was accepted at face value from multiple doctors. Healthcare systems need to be better equipped for flagging inconsistencies in patient histories and stronger push for second opinions. Another thing that I want to mention is systems meant to protect families failed repeatedly. Social workers, doctors, police, and child protective services had every opportunity to intervene. At least one doctor suspected Dee Dee, but didn't act strongly enough to do anything about it. We must strengthen our interagency communications and give more weight to professional suspicions. It's just so many failures all across the board. And I mentioned this before, but the abuse in this case wasn't always physical. psychological abuse is just as damaging to a child than any other type of abuse. Gypsy wasn't beaten, at least we don't think she was, but she was isolated, lied to, and mentally conditioned from childhood to believe that she was helpless. Psychological abuse, particularly from caregivers, is insidious and deserves equal attention in both public and professional spheres. I think this is one of the most key things I want you guys to take away from this is, this was, I don't know, she wasn't even a mother. She was evil walking, like I said, and there were so many people that could have said something, and even her family knew she had history of this, and no one said anything. So like always, I like to end on a quote, and this one comes from L.R. Nost. Children are not possessions. They are people with voices that deserve to be heard, even when it's inconvenient. The Gypsy Rose Blanchard case is a heartbreaking example of what happens when a child is treated like a possession rather than a person. Dee Dee controlled every aspect of Gypsy's life, her voice, her body, and even her identity, using her daughter to gain sympathy and support. Gypsy's attempts to speak up were silenced, and no one around her truly listened to her cries, even when the truth was uncomfortable. This quote reminds us that children deserve to be heard and respected as individuals, and ignoring their voices doesn't protect them, it traps them, sometimes with tragic consequences. So, like I said earlier, if you see something, say something, especially when it has to do with a child. It could be nothing. And 9 times out of 10, it probably is nothing, right? But it's better to do something about it and be wrong than not do anything and be right. So I hope that, this case wasn't as, uplifting as I wanted it to be, but that's okay. But like I said before, I tried something a little different this time around, and I tried a digital piece. So pulling that up right now with my iPad, and this is the finished piece. I don't know if you can see it. It's a mama and her baby. I did this in Procreate. I love Procreate. And I used to work digital a lot. Harley Quinn is digital too, but just printed on canvas. So this is the watercolor on pressed paper on Procreate. And what I wanted to do was, I normally paint either like a picture of the victim or something that inspires me by the case. And Dee Dee was the victim in this case, but I didn't want to paint her because I don't think that she deserves it. And I didn't want to paint anything to do with Gypsy either, because I think Gypsy is not quite there yet. I think she needs to do some growing. So I wanted to paint something that, reminded me of what true motherhood is, and, really caring for your child. And when you have a child, it's no longer your life. in the nicest way possible. It's not about you anymore, right? It's about your child, and that is how it should be. Children are not possessions. They are their own little humans, and we need to help cultivate them and help them grow into who they are supposed to be, and not into this warped version of what we want, right? So anyways, so I'll get off my soapbox now. So I hope you guys liked that case as much as I love putting them together. And make sure that you hit that subscribe button so you will never miss one of my terrible, horrible stories. And I hope that I see you guys in the next episode. Bye. Love you. Oh, I forgot to say, be kind and be good people out there. All right, now you can go. Bye.